Air travel. Where else can you feel the breeze from 10,000 feet while snacking on something that barely qualifies as food and the tight embrace of a seat that seems designed to cause excruciating back pain and facilitate deeply unwelcome physical interaction with your neighbor who doesn't understand that the middle seat gets the armrest, and also that elbowing you in the gut for 5 hours straight isn't polite. The most miserable form of travel often begins as torture on the ground, with huge traffic jams getting into the airport, long lines for bag drops, longer lines for security, food that sometimes won't poison you, about half the seats necessary for the crowds of waiting passengers, and endless, excruciating delays for any and every reason, but often resulting from airports bursting at the seams with their flight capacity. LAX in particular has long been one of the most dreaded destinations for both Angelenos and travelers worldwide. If someone agrees to pick you up from LAX on a Sunday night, that is either your truest friend or the love of your life. But hopefully, finally, maybe, things are beginning to change. In this video series, I'm going to walk you through the current and future plans for LA's 5 area airports, and also discuss their future potential connections to the transit network. LAX, Burbank, Long Beach, John Wayne, and Ontario are widely considered to be the 5 major Los Angeles airports, but they're not the only 5 serving Southern California. San Diego obviously is the second biggest and draws in some people from the LA Metro flying out of Southern Orange County. San Bernardino kind of has passenger service, but only one of those flights is year-round, and that goes to SFO. So it's not really doing much. There's Palm Springs, which serves the desert well enough, but probably doesn't draw in a lot of people from over the mountains. Imperial County has tiny commuter flights to LA. Santa Barbara has a modest amount of traffic and draws in people from Ventura County. And then Bakersfield, while not being in Southern California, probably draws in people from parts of SoCal, but not what I consider to be the LA metro region. So, when it comes to the LA metro area, these 5 airports dominate. And when it comes to these 5 airports, LAX dominates, as in, it's not even close. Let's compare numbers to 3 other metro areas with more than 2 passenger airports: New York, London, and the Bay Area. So here, the next closest airport to LAX is John Wayne, which has about 11% of our regional traffic to LAX's almost 73%, and after that, the other 3 are mid to low single digits. Compare to London with 5 airports, and the split is way less dramatic. Same with New York's 3 airports, and even Oakland and San Jose hold their own more respectably against SFO. With such a huge international hub in LAX, one of the world's busiest airports, and the only airport in the US that operates as a hub for all 3 major legacy carriers, in addition to Southwest, Alaska, JetBlue, and Allegiant, making it a massive airport for connections, while also somehow being the world's busiest origin-destination airport as well. It's always going to have a ton of traffic from connections that the other airports won't have, as they operate pretty much exclusively as origin-destination airports. Long Beach, Burbank, and John Wayne have their capacity massively limited by a variety of factors that aren't much likely to ever change, and which I'll address in the second video in this series, and so they'll never really grow beyond the meager share that they command here. The outlier, though, which I'll address in the third video in the series, is Ontario. It does not suffer the same restrictions as the other airports, and could one day become a pretty significant little brother to LAX. But let's start with LAX, where it's been, where it is now, where it's going, and where it could go. As almost anyone can tell you, the worst part of LAX has always been getting there. Fighting traffic across the region to get to the airport, which is up against the coast and massively inconvenient to reach for a huge portion of the LA metro area, is always a nightmare. And then, once you're at the airport, God knows how long it'll take to get into the airport. It's taken me over an hour on a Sunday night to move from the airport entrance to Terminal 4, which is just over halfway in. I would rather spend time in the traditional depiction of hell than the LAX traffic loop on a Sunday night. But in addition to those problems, there have also long been complaints about the interconnectedness, or lack thereof, of LAX's many terminals, and the quality and comfort of those aging terminals. And finally, LAX has long had problems with capacity, with planes stuck waiting on the tarmac for gates, or waiting in massive taxi lines for takeoff. It's not historically been a pleasant place. In fact, I can't recall anyone ever stating anything good about LAX, other than maybe the number of destinations it serves. So clearly, a lot needs to change. Luckily, Los Angeles World Airports, the organization that runs LAX, took that to heart and is basically remaking the entire airport from the ground up. Which, if you've been to LAX anytime in the past forever, you've probably noticed, as half the airport is always under construction. Let's start with the terminals. Rolling back to the distant past of 2008, just before the modernization project first began, you can see a couple of different islands of terminals not connected to each other. There's Terminal 1, Terminals 2 and 3, Tom Bradley International, or Terminal B, and Terminals 4 through 8. The hope was that you rarely needed to switch terminals for connections, but it did happen, especially to and from the international terminal. Plus, everyone needs to be bused to the Eagle's Nest, this shit-ass remote regional terminal for American Eagle that still lives but whose days are thankfully numbered. You can see here roughly the arrangement of airlines, some of them no longer with us, throughout the terminal in this era. One of the first and obvious goals of modernization was to make sure you could walk from terminal to terminal inside security. It's still a long walk around the horseshoe from 1 to 8, but at least you could theoretically do it. But another goal is to group the airlines more logically based on their alliances. We're going to revisit that point at the end. So, the easiest way to walk through this will just be to walk from terminals 1 to 8. So, Terminal 1, the once and future bastion of Southwest Airlines. This is actually one of the newest terminals at LAX, as it and Tom Bradley, the international terminal, were built for the Olympics in 1984 along with the upper deck roadway. Recent work on this terminal was separated out into 2 projects. First, with the refurbishment of the existing structure, which finished in 2018, followed by the connection structure to Terminal 2, using the space for more ticketing counters, baggage carousels, TSA screenings, and a vertical core for connecting to the forthcoming automated people mover train, hereafter referred to just as the APM. This connection structure, also referred to as Terminal 1.5, but officially still part of Terminal 1, also includes check-in counters for some domestic budget airlines and some international airlines that then bus their passengers from Terminal 1.5 to the west gates at Tom Bradley. Which is not ideal, and which I only assume has happened because they had space for extra check-in counters here, and they didn't at Tom Bradley. So I think that's actually going to be the way this stays for these airlines, even at LAX's endgame, which is kind of annoying if you're flying one of those airlines. Terminal 2 was one of the original 6 1960s satellite terminals. But while the others would eventually get connected to the terminal headhouses and expanded with new additions, becoming unholy Voltrons of old and new in the 1980s, they decided to start from scratch with Terminal 2, knocking it down and rebuilding it in 1989. Its modern renovation was completed in 2017. Terminal 2, when it was a satellite, was the original international terminal, but after Tom Bradley was built and Terminal 2 was demolished and rebuilt, it became kind of a grab bag of domestic and international airlines, while Terminal 3 had been home to mainly Alaska and JetBlue, and Virgin America before Alaska. But in the current reorganization, Delta has moved from Terminals 5 and 6 to 2 and 3, and it made sense to treat 2 and 3 more like one facility. So, with that in mind, it made sense to build a new combined head house between the 2 terminals, where you could check in and go through security for both. But they didn't stop there. Terminal 3 was a very shit terminal, if I may give the official Nick opinion, and they decided it was best to just wipe the unholy Voltron off the map and start from scratch, like they had done decades ago with Terminal 2. So starting in 2019, they closed the terminal and raised it. The new combined head house, with an APM vertical core for Terminal 2, opened first, followed by the new concourse and a new connection to Tom Bradley, along with a vertical core that will host an APM connection for Terminal 3. I finally flew out of the new Terminal 3 for the first time last fall, and I gotta say, outside of my flight being delayed by 12 hours, it was actually pretty nice. The Tom Bradley International Terminal, Terminal B, was the first to be rebuilt in the modern series of projects, as it badly needed the capacity to handle larger modern jets. You can see here how they did it while keeping the old terminal in operation during construction, which is actually pretty interesting. The North Concourse opened in 2013, and the South Concourse in 2015. Interestingly, one relic from the old terminal still persists, adjacent to the bus gates that bus passengers out to the remote gates, which are basically parking spots at the very western edge of the airport, and which will thankfully soon no longer exist. Then, a brand new midfield satellite concourse, the west gates of Tom Bradley, connected to the main concourse by an underground passageway, opened in 2021. And currently under construction, using a very different mid-century modern design language, which I kinda love to be honest, are the midfield satellite concourse south gates. This is being built off-site along the north edge of the airport in 9 segments, which will then get delivered to the final site and assembled, which is crazy. This is set to open in 2025 and service narrow-body aircraft, crucially replacing those American Eagle gates at the Eagle's Nest, allowing for the demolition of that terminal and the construction of something different in its place. At the end of all this, there shouldn't be any remote gates left at LAX. Oh, and Tom Bradley is also in the process of getting its own vertical core connection to the APM built. It actually might be done already. As I record this, I'm actually flying out of Tom Bradley tomorrow, so I will put the answer on the screen. Moving on to Terminal 4, that's been American's turf, I believe, since it was first constructed as a satellite terminal, and it's in the middle of construction right now. The first thing to finish back in 2016 was a connection behind security to Terminal B. Similar to how Delta took over 2 adjacent terminals and constructed a joint head house between them, American also relocated part of its operation to Terminal 5, and the first project for Terminals 4 and 5 was the reconstruction of the connection between them, which includes a vertical core that will have an APM connection. Currently, the new Terminal 4 head house is under construction, seen here adding more baggage claim on Level 1, a pass-through before security to Terminal 5 on Level 2, effectively making this a new combined American head house for Terminals 4 and 5, and moving security from Level 3 to Level 4 with a pass-through after security to Terminal 5 so you don't need to use the current tunnel that's midway down the concourse. Speaking of that concourse, like in Terminal 3, you can see here how it's replacing the old Voltron satellite terminal, adding more seating and concessions on this level and more lounge space on this level. Although, confusingly, some documents show only the southern portion of the terminal getting replaced, which is the bit that's under construction now, and based on the language here, I think it was scaled back to retain this section of concourse. Outside of the combined vertical core and the new Terminal 4 and 5 head house, I don't see any major work planned for Terminal 5 except for some internal renovation, and the combined Terminal 4 and 5 projects are slated to be done in 2027. It's worth noting that Terminal 5 currently houses Spirit and JetBlue in addition to American, but I think that may change, as we'll see soon. Terminal 6, currently home to Alaska and some others, is in the process of getting completely overhauled in the concourse. It's getting new Voltron additions, and they should be done fairly soon, if not already, by the time this video releases, and its vertical core APM connection was recently completed. Unlike between Terminals 4 and 5, it does not appear that Terminal 6 is adding airside circulation behind security between the head houses of Terminals 5 and 6, making the tunnel between 5 and 6 still the only way to move between them behind security. And finally, refurbishment work on Terminals 7 and 8, along the home of United, finished in 2019. As you can see here, after these changes, no terminal is an island. You can walk between every one behind security, and Terminals 4 and 5 will be getting this extra connection as well by 2027. So that's it with the terminals, right? Not even close. The granddaddy of all these plans is to add 2 more large terminal areas, Concourse 0 and Terminal 9. Now, these were meant to be open by the Olympics in 2028, but as you can see from this construction schedule detailing how that would be possible, it relied on construction starting earlier than now. Not to say it isn't still possible, and it seems like they're close to construction starting, but I wouldn't put my money on it, and I've seen language shifting to things like elements of this project will be done by the Olympics. Starting with Concourse 0, this will utilize Terminal 1's head house and be linked to it after security, which is why it's just called Concourse and not Terminal, and add 11 new passenger gates, although demolishing 2 of Terminal 1's, so there's a net 9 gate gain. This will replace the current LA exit area and Skyway, which will be demolished. And then there's Terminal 9, which will be the only terminal on the other side of Sepulveda, and which will, as we'll see, require a massive amount of spaghetti roadwork, and which will replace the Eagle's Nest and connect to Terminal 8 with a pedestrian structure spanning Sepulveda. This will add 12 to 18 gates, and it seems like there are some design options, as seen in this video here, although nothing more has been officially released about those options to my knowledge. Crucially, both of these are being constructed with international arrival facilities. Now, this hasn't been officially stated by LAX, I don't think, but most people online have been speculating that the ultimate aim with all of these facilities is to group the airlines by alliance. It's long been a bit of a mess at LAX, especially with limited international arrivals facilities, and this new layout would allow for a much more logical grouping that would keep codeshare connections, including international ones, all within easy walking distance of each other. In this scenario, Terminal 1 and Concourse 0 are probably all southwest, which gets to expand its presence at the airport and keep its international arrivals close at hand in Concourse 0. These Terminal 1.5 bus gates, I believe, will remain, so if you're going to be on one of these unaligned domestic budget airlines or one of these unaligned international airlines, you will probably still be stuck busing out to the west gates of Tom Bradley from 1.5 after checking in. But I assume if you don't need a bag drop and you have your boarding pass on your phone, you can probably just go straight to Tom Bradley. Not entirely sure. Terminals 2, 3, and parts of B are Delta's SkyTeam Alliance, with international facilities in B, obviously, and I think they're meant to come back in Terminal 2 as well. B, especially Tom Bradley's west gates, will contain a smattering of many unaligned domestic airlines and unaligned international airlines, including, as mentioned, those that check in at 1.5 and bus over. American's One World Alliance lives in Terminals B, 4, 5, and 6, with 6 being largely Alaska Airlines, and maybe some others. I think American will want to consolidate Terminal 5, so I do think that JetBlue will move to 6, and that Spirit will move to the midfield satellite concourse south at Tom Bradley. This allows Spirit, obviously, to access international arrivals facilities within their terminal, and JetBlue in Alaska, actually, because Terminal 6 can access Terminal 7's international arrivals facilities. And then my least favorite airline, United Star Alliance, would control Terminals 7, 8, and 9, with Terminal 9's international arrivals facility and A380 gates making up for the lack of proximity of Terminals 7 and 8 to Terminal B. This keeps all of the intra-airline and codeshare connections localized, and gives every airline international arrivals access without having to split up their gates. This, or something very much like it, is likely the endgame for LAX. And I do mean endgame. After all of these changes, I don't think we're likely to ever see another significant expansion of the airport. All told, LAX will go from 146 gates to something like 182, hugely bolstering airliner capacity, but it's not adding a runway. The LAX runways don't actually seem to be remotely close to capacity at the moment, with fewer aircraft movements by far than its peak in 2000. But that's growing again, and with the expansion we're about to do, I imagine we'll get there soon enough. It's already the 6th busiest airport in the world, and as we'll see in the second video in this series, the least likely to have its traffic reduced due to competing future high-speed rail routes. And there's just not room for another runway at LAX. An attempt to add a taxiway failed, because it would require shifting one of the runways north, which was opposed by everyone living nearby. There are some airfield improvements happening, so maybe that'll help keep things flowing more smoothly in the near term. But for LAX to ultimately add more gates, and it would actually only need one more concourse probably to make it the airport with the most gates in the world, although I'm sure others would have added more by then too. It would correlate directly to more aircraft movement, so would only be possible if the 4 runways can somehow handle it without overflowing. The only good place to put said gates would probably be another midfield satellite concourse. The Wester gates of Tom Bradley? Now that the remote gates won't be needed, you'd have to move the fuel depot and the fire department over here, and then knock all this down and put another terminal here. And it's far enough away from the head house that you'd probably get LAX to seriously consider an airside train underground to access the satellite concourse. But it'd be much easier to build above ground, I imagine, for the rest of the terminals. But I have absolutely no idea where you would make the grade transition. Along the side of the Tom Bradley head house, I guess? Something like this? Although then connecting between the Tom Bradley gates is a nightmare. Maybe it's just 2 airside trains that connect at different grades with elevators at the main Tom Bradley station. And at that point, you can actually just build the satellite airside train without building the loop airside train, since they're separate. Anyway, the airlines with the Terminal 1.5 check-ins would love to have a loop airside train, as it would neutralize the pain of having to bus their passengers over to the west gates. And maybe one day on an airside train, you could build an airside hotel for overnight transfers.
which I have to say, I just used one and it was immensely convenient. They don't make a ton of sense in the US though, because the US makes every international traveler go through customs, even if their start and end points are both in other countries. So a Canadian, say, connecting through the US to South America would still have to re-enter security after passport control, and customs making an airside hotel a little less attractive when you have the landside hotels right there, which would also lobby incredibly hard against the construction of an airside hotel, I imagine. All this said, again, I really don't see LAX choosing to build another concourse or terminal after 09 because of the 4-runway constraint, and without another concourse, I don't see anything spurring them to build this theoretical airside train either when they've done so much work to try to rework the terminals to keep the code-share connections within easy walking distance. Plus, as we'll see, as they're building the before-security landside train, the APM, they already decided against attempting a loop with stations at each terminal for cost and ease of construction. That Terminal 1.5 bus gate wrinkle would be the only thing spurring an airside train, and it's probably best solved, or at least more cheaply solved, by one day just biting the bullet and adding more check-in counter space at Tom Bradley somehow. So yep, I think neither more concourses nor an airside train are in LAX's future.
Eventually, and honestly probably not before long, LAX will be bursting at the seams again, and there will need to be somewhere for that traffic to go. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because right now we need to take a look at a different kind of traffic. Because in addition to the terminal and the airfield work, the other major change to LAX is how people get in and out of the airport. If you're local, you've certainly seen the automated people mover tracks and stations going up over the last few years.
This free landside train is the centerpiece of LAX's Landside Access Modernization Program, or LAMP.
I love LAMP.
Instead of stopping at every terminal, there will be 3 stations in the central terminal area. The West Station has aerial pedestrian connections to terminals 3, B, and 4, well, more accurately 4.5 to serve 4 and 5. The Central Station has connections to Terminal 2, although more accurately 2.5 to serve terminals 2 and 3, and Terminal 1, although more accurately 1.5 to serve both terminals 1 and 2, and then 5.5 for terminals 5 and 6. The East Station will start out with just the connection to 7.5 to serve terminals 7 and 8, but as you can see, space was left for a connection to Concourse 0, although if Concourse 0 does not have its own check-in facilities or security, then I guess technically that'll just be another connection to Terminal 1. While there's not a station being built there yet, an infill station will be constructed for Terminal 9 once that is built. Next is the ITF, or Intermodal Transportation Facility West, which is already completed and which replaces the economy parking lot C with a huge new parking structure. In addition to economy parking, this will be the primary pickup and drop-off location for shuttle buses, which will relocate outside of the loop, and ride shares, which will need to move after LAX is raised for Concourse 0. And you can kind of see here why Concourse 0 and Terminal 9 aren't under construction yet. They need the midfield satellite concourse and the APM to open before they can raise what's in place of those to start construction. The next station is the ITF East/Airport Metro Connector. There were originally plans to build a second garage here, but I think that's been scaled back to a surface lot with more pickup drop-off space. And in fact, this will be the primary pickup drop-off point for private cars. Yes, you'll never need to drive the loop again. The Metro Connector station has both bus bays, where all municipal buses will go, and a K-line platform. The AMC itself will actually be done this fall, and may allow trains through then to start the new CK service pattern and allow trains to reach Century Aviation, but the People Mover itself, sadly, it's had its opening pushed back to April 2025. I was seriously excited to have this, so I'm super annoyed. But again, that 2025 open date, along with the 2025 Midfield Satellite South open date, seem to be the two things keeping Concourse 0 and Terminal 9 from starting construction, which means they'll probably not be open by 2028. Oh, and finally the APM will stop at the brand new and unbelievably massive Consolidated Rental Car Facility, which will collect the seriously scattered rental car services into one central location, freeing up a lot more space around the airport. The other aspect to the LAMP,
I love LAMP,
is the roadways. Once Terminal 9 and Concourse 0 start going in, things will have to change. The initial plans were to demolish these roadways, and then construct this in conjunction with Terminal 9. And, I have notes. It looks like a 6th grader booted up City Skylines for the first time and submitted his first interchange attempt as the official plan. I have my version of it here that tries to make a little more sense out of it with arrows, but I'm not really sure if it's successful in simplifying it. This would allow access to both the arrivals and departure levels of Terminal 9 from the existing arrivals and departures roadways, as well as from Sepulveda North, South, and Century, with some of the Sepulveda ramps being relocated way up here. This was changed to the slightly less dizzying version seen here. At least I think I've interpreted this graphic right. In this version, some more roads get demolished while others get saved. The departures roadway still continues on Terminal 9, but the arrivals at Terminal 9 can now only be accessed from this light at Century, as can departures. Meanwhile, departures can exit onto either Century East or Sepulveda North or South via these same ramps, while the arrivals must exit at the same light it entered. The ramps into and out of the airport from the southern section of Sepulveda have been eliminated, so now anyone going into the central terminal area from Sepulveda must enter from this northbound or this southbound ramp and exit to Sepulveda onto this southbound ramp or at this light, which also has a 96th Street East option. This version does, however, add a terminal return option for the departures level, where the previous iteration only had one for the arrivals level, albeit this new return is very roundabout. In the end, this makes driving into the airport way more confusing and probably way lengthier. But frankly, I'm okay with that because the goal is to get people to the terminals using the APM, and this will encourage it. Hopefully, it'll also encourage people to arrive via Metro with this shiny new connection and get some cars off the road. Regardless of the spaghettification of the roads, getting into the airport will be much easier thanks to the APM, and getting to the airport will be much easier thanks to the Metro. Now we go on to the final section on LAX, Metro Futurecasting, in which I dream up all the potential ways transit likely could connect to the airport in the future. Let's start with two that we know are going to happen because they're in Measure-M. First, the Lincoln BRT will terminate here, and by my guess will probably take the route shown here, which keeps it largely to airport property, which is a huge area, by the way. I had no idea they owned all this. Second, the Sepulveda line will eventually terminate at LAX, and likely, if it's heavy rail, in one of these two configurations, and likely with a preceding stop at Manchester. This should be entirely below grade, and the northerly option, while having more space for tail tracks without tunneling under the rental car facility, is a bit far from the train platform for my taste, so I prefer a southerly connection adjacent to the other platforms. If this ever gets extended east to SoFi, it would need to go under the rental car facility and thus be deep enough that it's beneath its foundation, but I think it would need to be anyway for tail tracks, depending on where you sited the platforms. Although I guess you could use something where you don't need tail tracks, like with the downtown Santa Monica station. Honestly, not sure about that, but I'll leave the southerly configuration as I like it more. Explicitly intended but not currently funded is a conversion of the Lincoln BRT to rail as a future C-Line extension. And I think there's two options of how this could go. Adding on a layer showing how grades would work, with blue being elevated, green being at grade, and brown being below. The first option, as I see it, would build a junction here, and run the line along Manchester elevated, with a station connecting to the Sepulveda line at Sepulveda. The upside here is that there's far more room for a junction and the grade change, possibly even allowing for a flying junction, which would be hugely beneficial. The second option, as I see it, would be to add a much tighter junction here at the parking lot for the K-Line's train yard, and then go elevated on Arbor Vitae. There's not as much room for the junction or grade change here, and I'm not certain of its feasibility. But I think it's overall better because once you hit Airport Boulevard, it travels almost entirely in LAX-owned right-of-way. It can split off the road here for a straight shot over these parking lots, which could eventually be developed, at least out of the runway exclusion zone, and has a station over Sepulveda near the in-and-out. It then sticks to the median of Lincoln at grade for as long as it can until it becomes elevated here. This feels much better as it follows the likely path of the BRT, meaning the BRT in some parts can be built in such a way that makes conversion to rail easier. That initial junction is really the only sticking point, and maybe its proximity to the runways. I don't really know the rules when it comes to that. So that's all the intended transit connections, right? Mostly. One of the quick-build BRTs is meant to go down La Cienega, but it's slated to end at Sepulveda with a connection to the Sepulveda line at Fox Hills.
It seems like it would be feasible and trivial, though, to take that further down, with a station at Howard Hughes if the Sepulveda line doesn't have one, which the initial corridor study claimed it wouldn't, and hit the Sepulveda line Manchester station before turning onto Manchester and then heading down Aviation to the airport metro connector station. This duplicates the Sepulveda line south of the BRT's intended terminus, but the BRT would probably be built first, so I think it'd be pretty useful regardless. And I think those BRT lanes on Manchester would come in handy because even though there's no plans for them, I foresee future BRT lines on Manchester and Florence, which both terminate together at Playa del Rey. Florence, in my view, would split off of La Tijera, so neither of these would actually connect directly to the airport, but they're in the bounds of this graphic, so I'm including them. I'll talk more about these in my eventually forthcoming video about how Metro approaches long-term planning. Similarly, I foresee an eventual Beach Cities BRT that does end at the airport station, going down Aviation in the bounds of this graphic. Then there's the speculation that the APM and the Inglewood Transit Connector could, well, connect. If a specific contractor is chosen for the ITC, they theoretically could, although as you see here, there's a problem with the APM terminus being embedded into the rental car building, plus the fact that Los Angeles World Airports, who will run the APM, will have no interest in logistically figuring out how to join it with the ITC and jointly run it, even though it might be better for the city. If it does happen, it would likely branch off prior to the rental car station and head down Century, where it would turn up Prairie and connect with the existing ITC. I really don't see this happening though. I think a potential ITC Phase 2 would head down to the C-Line Hawthorne Lennox station instead. And finally, the last potential LAX transit connection I foresee would be if they finally constructed a Metrolink Express line from Union Station. The only way I see this happening is by using the Harbor Sub, and with River to Rail happening, I don't think they'll construct it above ground. And I also don't think that utilizing that corridor without serving it, only putting in an express bypass, would be politically viable. So my thoughts on it, as I've stated before, are that if this is built, the section along the Harbor Sub would be built entirely below grade, with a 2-level single bore that has an LAX Metrolink Express on the bottom, maybe stopping at Vermont and maybe at the Slauson A-Line and Southeast Gateway Line stations, and on the upper level would be a Slauson light rail line. Where the Harbor Sub angles down off of Slauson, the lines would split off and the Express would come straight from there in dual bore, leaving the Harbor Sub where it winds at Inglewood. As you can see, terminating the Sepulveda line at the southern option means that this would not have to tunnel deeper below it. Although I guess it could tunnel above it if the Sepulveda line has to tunnel deeper to get below the rental car facility, but it seems like it would be difficult to build it between the ground and a lower station if the Sepulveda line's built first. I don't know how this works. Again, I'm not an engineer. But yeah, I think that's it. I think that's the endgame for LAX. Let's end by looking at the completion dates and projected opening dates for all existing projects. It'll always be LA's primary airport and always dominate the other 4, but I think one of them can creep a little bit toward it in passenger traffic in the end. Stay tuned for part 2 coming soon, where we discuss Burbank, Long Beach, and John Wayne.